Martin Luther and the birth of Protestantism. Today we're going to be talking about a hugely important period in European history that really shook things up in a big way, the Protestant Reformation. This period, spanning roughly the 16th century, fundamentally changed the religious landscape of Europe. But where did it all begin? Who was the man who dared to challenge the established power of the Catholic Church? Buckle up, because we're about to meet Martin Luther, the reluctant revolutionary who sparked the Protestant firestorm. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. Let's get started. Martin Luther wasn't born a rabble-rousing reformer. In fact, he was a devout German monk and scholar. Born in 1483, Luther entered the Augustinian order, deeply troubled by his own sense of sin and yearning for God's forgiveness. He meticulously studied the Bible and church teachings, eventually becoming a professor of theology at the University of Wittenberg. Now, imagine Luther's world. The Catholic Church held immense power, both spiritual and political. One of the most controversial practices at the time was the selling of indulgences. These were essentially permits, claimed by the Church, to reduce the amount of punishment a person faced in purgatory, a temporary state of purification after death. Luther was appalled by this. He believed that salvation came solely through faith in God's grace, not through purchasing forgiveness. In 1517, something happened that would change the course of history. Frustrated by the rampant sale of indulgences, Luther hammered his famous 95 Theses to the door of the castle church in Wittenberg. These theses were propositions he invited scholars to debate, questioning the church's authority on indulgences and emphasizing the importance of faith over good works. What started as an academic debate quickly snowballed into a full-blown controversy. Luther's theses resonated with many across Europe, who shared his grievances against the church's perceived corruption and its focus on rituals over personal faith. He became a powerful voice, advocating for a return to the core teachings of the Bible and a direct relationship between individuals and God. Luther's defiance angered the Catholic Church. Pope Leo X condemned his writings as heretical, demanding he retract his views. However, Luther refused to back down. In a dramatic act of defiance, he publicly burned the papal decree in 1520. This cemented his break from the Catholic Church, making him an outlaw within the Catholic world. The following year, at the Diet of Worms, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V gave Luther one last chance to recant. But Luther, now a symbol of resistance, famously declared, "Here I stand, I can do no other. God help me, Amen." This act solidified his role as the leader of the Reformation movement. Luther's ideas spread like wildfire thanks to the newly invented printing press. People across Europe devoured his translated works, and new Protestant denominations began to emerge, challenging the Catholic Church's monopoly on Christianity. Leaders like John Calvin and Henry Vallée in England further developed Protestant theology, leading to a fracturing of Christian Europe. The legacy of Martin Luther. The Protestant Reformation had a profound impact on European history. It ushered in an era of religious wars, political upheaval, and a questioning of traditional authority. However, it also paved the way for increased literacy as people sought to interpret the Bible themselves, and for a new emphasis on individual conscience. Martin Luther, though a complex figure with some controversial views, remains a pivotal figure in Western history. He ignited a religious revolution that forever changed the face of Christianity and set the stage for a more modern world. Now, imagine yourself in Luther's shoes. Europe in the 16th century was a world steeped in religious tradition. The Catholic Church wielded immense power, both as a spiritual authority and a political force. Grand cathedrals dominated cityscapes, and priests served as intermediaries between God and humanity. People sought forgiveness for their sins through pilgrimages, prayers, and good works, but a shadow loomed over their lives: the daunting concept of purgatory. This supposed intermediate state between death and heaven was believed to be a place of temporary suffering where souls awaited purification before entering God's presence. The Church offered a controversial solution: indulgences. These were essentially permits, claimed by the Church to reduce the amount of time spent in purgatory. People could purchase indulgences for themselves or even for deceased loved ones. The sale of indulgences became a significant source of income for the Church, often accompanied by a flamboyant display of wealth and power. This practice deeply troubled Martin Luther. He was a devout monk who had dedicated his life to studying the Bible and wrestling with profound theological questions. Luther saw the emphasis on indulgences as a distortion of core Christian beliefs. He believed that true forgiveness and salvation came solely through faith in God's grace, not through purchasing forgiveness. This wasn't just a theological debate for Luther, It was a deeply personal matter. He, like many others, grappled with the burden of sin and the desperate yearning for God's mercy. Luther's growing unease with the church's practices wasn't happening in a vacuum. Whispers of discontent were spreading across Europe. People were questioning the church's authority and the lavish lifestyles of some clergy. Corruption and a disconnect between the church's teachings and its practices were becoming increasingly apparent. Luther, with his scholarly background and powerful voice, became a focal point for these growing anxieties. His eventual challenge to the indulgence system, in the form of his 95 Theses, struck a chord with many who yearned for a simpler, more direct relationship with God. Got it? That was just a glimpse into the explosive story of Martin Luther, and how his defiant 95 Theses against Catholic indulgences sparked the Protestant Reformation, upending Christianity and reshaping Western civilization. From Luther's theological clashes with Rome to the wars and conflicts his reforms unleashed, this Reformation left an indelible mark on history. But as momentous as Luther's ideological revolution was, the history of the early church itself contains many overlooked stories and voices equally deserving of attention. Our next incredible video dives into the often suppressed narratives of women in the formative years of Christianity. You'll meet figures like Mary Magdalene, known as the Apostle to the Apostles, after being the first witness to the resurrection; Priscilla, the influential teacher who instructed the elite preacher Apollos; Perpetua and Felicity, whose defiant martyrdom became a major inspiration; and pioneering scholars like Macrina the Younger, whose theological insights shaped Christian doctrine. These are just a few of the marginalized yet powerful feminine voices that helped shape the foundations of the faith from the very beginning. Their courageous stories have been lost to history for far too long. So if you want to uncover the resilience, wisdom, and trailblazing influence of Christianity's matriarchal pioneers, subscribe and don't miss overlooked voices. Women's role in the early church, a long overdue tribute that will change how you see the origins of the religion. That was just a glimpse into the explosive story of Martin Luther and how his defiant 95 Theses against Catholic indulgences sparked the Protestant Reformation, upending Christianity and reshaping Western civilization. From Luther's theological clashes with Rome to the wars and conflicts his reforms unleashed, this Reformation left an indelible mark on history. But as momentous as Luther's ideological revolution was, the history of the early church itself contains many overlooked stories and voices equally deserving of the spotlight. Our next unmissable video pulls back the curtain on the often suppressed narratives of women in the formative years of Christianity. You'll witness Mary Magdalene, known as the Apostle to the Apostles after being the first to see the resurrected Jesus; Priscilla, the influential teacher who instructed the elite preacher Apollos; Perpetua and Felicity, whose defiant martyrdom became a major inspiration; and pioneering scholars like Macrina the Younger, whose theological insights shaped Christian doctrine. These are just a few of the marginalized yet powerful feminine voices that helped mold the foundations of the faith from the very beginning. Their courageous stories have been buried for far too long. So if you want to experience the resilience, wisdom, and trailblazing influence of Christianity's matriarchal pioneers, subscribe and don't miss overlooked voices. Women's role in the early church, a long overdue tribute that will change how you see the origins of the religion. Hit that subscribe button now so you're notified as soon as this powerful episode arrives. Let's resurface the vital feminine spirit that has guided the church from its earliest days.